If journalist and consciousness researcher Lynne McTaggart has her way, we humans will stop battling each other and begin bonding at a personal, community, and world level. She says we do not flourish because we compete and fight as a nation or as a species. McTaggart explains it all in her new book called The Bond. She is also the author of The Lost Symbol, The Field, and The Intention Experiment. It is my pleasure to welcome Lynne McTaggart to Studio 4 to tell us more. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Fanny. Nice to meet you, too.
You know, as I was talking to Tim Flannery, I thought there's a connection, a bond in a sense, between what he's talking about in his book and what you're talking about in The Bond, that we're all connected.
Well, it's interesting to see the synergy that's going on between different writers. You know, we're all seeing a little sense of the same thing, and it's all part of this understanding that we're a lot less individual than we thought we were.
But we've been raised, most of us, to be individuals and self-actualized.
Well, that's really our problem. I mean, because we've been living, in a sense, a lie. You know, science has told us for 300 plus years that we're separate entities and that we're also in competition for survival. But all of the new science is telling us a very new story. You know, in researching The Bond, I looked at not only quantum physics, but biology and psychology and sociology and all these areas, and they're coming up with the same conclusion, which is that there is this bond, this connection that's so intrinsic, profound, and basic to all of us, all living things, that it's difficult to determine where something ends and something else begins. But yet, we're still living like separate and competitive things. And because of that, and because we bring up our children like that, because we make competition the sort of, the mantra of our lives. That's why we're in crisis now. That's why we're seeing all of the problems we have, and people are talking about, it's the end of this. It's the end of something. It's the end of capitalism. It's the end of oil. It's the end of food because it's the end of oil. It's even maybe the beginning of the end of the world. But what it's the end of is this false sense of who we are, because I think what's happening is we're having these crises because we're finally having to face that we've been living a lie and that we have to live differently. We have to live according to the bond.
And the bond is a natural human tendency, I would think. We long for connection. You think of the mother-child connection, a natural connection. Is there a way that you can have that with others, that intense connection, or should we attempt to have that intense connection?
We have it involuntarily, Fanny. That's the interesting thing.
That's where the quantum physics comes in.
Well,
a little bit.
In every area. I mean, I was really fascinated to see about mirror neurons. For instance, while we're talking, the very same neurons are firing in me when I watch you move your arm as would when I'm moving my arm. Or if you're happy, the very same neurons fire in me as if I were experiencing that emotion too. So we're constantly merging, even with the most disagreeable people, we have that underpinning and connection. And as you say, we long to share, care, and be fair. That's been hardwired into our DNA.
Yes.
And we act against that, we're in trouble.
And we have been acting against it, and for a long time, and sometimes not. Depends on the day.
Well, it does depend on the day, but it's the way we've created our society. It's the way we've created our relationships. You know, when we have relationships, we think we can only be friends with people who are just like us. And we look for that sameness. We look for I in everybody else we try to connect with. But the point of the bond is that we're connecting. You know, nature has a drive to wholeness, not a drive to competition. And we connect with people whether or not we want to. And that if we stoke that connection, if we move past this sense of, of having to be competitive in different areas of our lives, we'll begin to survive and thrive. And we will have a better world. We'll be able to connect and move to the next stage of our evolution.
In a sports game, we compete, and if all goes well, at the end we still like each other.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I mean,
Yes.
yes, you're playing a grand game of hockey or soccer, and in the end you pat each other on the back and say, "Great game."
Yeah, well, that's what we're really talking about. But we don't do that in our lives now. We even compete with our neighbors. God forbid our neighbors drive a Mercedes when we drive a Ford, you know. So, but if you do surrender to the bond, and you know, this is something that I go into great detail in the book, how to do this, how to make the relationship most important. If you understand that you're here to make that connection above anything else, you can withstand difference. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Boston. Two groups on either side of the most polarized issue in America, abortion. The pro-life groups and the pro-choice groups decided to get together after there were some shootings that occurred in Boston.
Yes, they killed that doctor.
Yeah, so they decided we have to get together. So they met in secret for a couple of years, and they learned how to what they called dialogue, where they weren't shouting each other down, they weren't having to be right. They wanted to try to connect deeply with how they really felt. So they shared very deeply and honestly. They learned to tone down their inflammatory language, and at the end of 2 years, they had a press conference, and the reporters said, okay, so who won? Who won the debate? And they said, well, no one. We're much more entrenched with our beliefs now that we've, you know, talked about them so deeply. And so the reporters said, so it was a failure then? And they said, well, no. We party together, we go out together, you know, we watch each other's kids, we love each other. They made that connection, and when you do, when you live the bond, you can have that aerial perspective.
So you're influenced by one another, perhaps, but you can think differently than I think. You can be a pro-lifer, and I can be a pro-choicer, or however you say it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I can say, you're okay, you just don't believe in abortion. I'm okay, I do believe in abortion and the power of a woman to choose. But it's just a difference of opinion. It's not necessarily right or wrong, or is it?
No, it's not right or wrong. That's the point. If you look at the Israeli and the Palestinian crisis, you know,
and we do,
and we do all the time. You know, one guy who was working with the two sides said, you know, how can you? There was one group that was working together. He said, how could you work together? And they said, well, we can embrace paradox. And what did he? And he said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, okay, let's give you each version of the birth of Israel. So the Palestinians wrote a paragraph calling it the disaster, all about these refugees, you know, being booted out of their homes. The Israeli wrote the historic Day of Independence, about the Jews' right to their homeland and how the UN sanctioned it, but they were beleaguered from all sides. And the sadness of it is both versions of the truth are right. Both are right, but when you can take a perspective of the bond, when you can put yourself at service to the relationship, then you can connect with people who are different from you and learn how to not only find common ground, but also to allow that to coexist.
We've done in this province in the forest industry. The major forest companies have come together with the loggers, the people on the ground, and the unions, and the scientists, and the forest scientists, and there was some very bad logging happening, and bad road building, and all of that, and high grading, and the companies realized it wasn't the right way to go, and we needed more silviculture, and I don't mean it's perfect, but dialogue did it.
Yes.
More than anything.
Yes.
Understanding each other, like we are hewers of wood, and it's okay to grow trees, and it's okay to cut trees down. Just do it right.
Yes, and if
you know, and we can find some common ground.
And you can make you meet in that space between, and that's even a way to overcome things. You know, with your worst enemy, when you're honest and you share deeply and you put yourself at service to that relationship, you can connect with anyone.